consulting, and he's also worked as graduate research assistant and budget analyst, and many more. So now I'll leave the floor to Mr. Shujat so that he can officially start the session. Yes, please.
Thank you, Yusra. Can you see my screen as well? Perfect.
Yes, we can. We can.
All right. So thank you for the introduction. It's really good to be here, even if virtually back at LUMS, and really appreciate everyone who showed up for this session. I know Friday is usually when you start closing your week, so appreciate the time that you have taken out for this. Um, so Yusra reached out and we wanted to do a session on critical thinking. And I was trying to develop something that would be helpful for you as you go through your college years and onwards into the professional lives. Yusra has already covered my introduction, so it's all good. Currently working as an engagement manager at Oliver Wyman, specializing in government and public institutions across the region. So I'm currently have my primary clients are mega city giga projects in the Middle East, and consulting with them to develop them. But let's jump into the session itself. And I would like to keep it uh, very interactive throughout. And we'll also do some breakout rooms just to do some exercises, because for me, critical thinking tends to be a very as a laborious exercise. It's often presented as something that's very hard to do, keep track of different steps that you want to consider. But that's not really the case. You can't do those steps. You don't have to make it very prescriptive, because at the end of the day, critical thinking is something that you want to be able to do very quickly, very regularly in all situations, not just professional or your student lives. So it has a lot of benefits. It improves your decision making. It helps you solve problems. It makes you a better communicator as well, because you're able to tell a story very clearly without any loopholes. It avoids you from manipulation because you understand what the other person is bringing to the table. And it creates innovation and creativity, right? You think ahead for all of those things. So I mean, from a literature point of view, there are steps, analysis, evaluation, inference, explanation, bias check. I'm not going to go into them, but because they're not very relevant to what we're doing, and they're not very relevant to using critical thinking on a daily basis. So instead, what I want to do in this session is look at three ways where you can use critical thinking in various situations. And this should cover a lot of the ways in which you want to use critical thinking to benefit yourself in your lives. So those three ways in which you can use critical thinking is by questioning assumptions that whenever something is presented to you, question those assumptions, modify your perspective, and consider the consequences. So I'll explain all of these, and then we'll go into some practices and exercises, so you fully understand how to use this in various situations. But by the way, I'll also keep some time at the end for any questions and answers across the session and anything else that you want to ask. So Yusra, I'll trust you to keep time as well, as to make sure that we're not overshooting it. So for questioning assumptions, I mean, as it says on the slide, question the assumptions behind this statement. Questions to uncover the biases that lead to more informed decisions. So for example, someone decided to have fewer lifeboats on the Titanic because they assumed it will not sink, right? So if you had questioned that assumption, maybe more lives would have been saved. And as you use this critical thinking method, think of the things that you should keep in mind are you should consider the logical flow of an argument, and try to see if every link in that chain, if there is a chain and if every link of the chain is valid. Consider your own biases and the biases of others and their incentives. Some of the blind sides that we often fall into are often of our own making because we have our own biases, and we fail to look at things critically. And then look at what are the primary things that might cause an argument to fail, right? So the assumption that the Titanic was made of something that was very hard, and will not sink, was the reason why it failed as well. Because if it's hard, it's more brittle and it can break more easily. There's less flexibility. Then the second thing is modifying your perspective. Uh, and this is where things get a little bit more interesting, because you don't just think linearly, right? You start thinking of alternate explanations for the same phenomena, or you start looking at the broader um, externalities or the broader effects of something that might not just be relevant to the particular situation or the primary participants, right? So an example here is, let's imagine there is an active chain accident taking place at a highway at night. The first thing the police will do to prevent further death or injury is to put on the LED safety vests themselves. Rather than stopping more cars from coming in, the first thing they will do is protect themselves, because if they have to be out there on the highway, uh, they need to be protected. And again, in this case, the things to keep in mind are to consider everything and everyone that can be impacted. Seek and encourage diverse opinions. So don't just stick to what you know. Let others bring in their opinions as well, because there's obviously no one is perfect in their approach, and you want to listen to others. And do not get stuck with a perspective either, right? So keep it flexible. Keep the possibility of other things happening in your mind. And then finally, we have to consider the consequences. And this is where you start looking at things down the line, right? You want to look at the consequences of the actions today further down the line. And it's very important from the point of view, because, uh, in physics, we have the effect of, if you hit something, you get an equal reaction back. But in real life, especially with humans, uh, the reaction of someone changes based on your action, right? So think of playing chess. If you make a move, you can't think of only your moves 5 moves down the line. You have to think of every move that you make will cause your opponent to change their approach as well. And the simple example is, if you hit a ball on the wall with 3 times, you will have the same result. The ball will bounce back to you. But if you hit your friend 3 times, I mean, if it's a really good friend, maybe the first 2 times they let it go, but the third time the reaction will be very different, right? So consider the consequences in the way that the past does not always determine the future. You think ahead, and each action that you take will trigger a change in the reaction. So, I mean, I can take questions here, or we can go into the next ones where we practice these, and maybe that's where we can have some more interaction. So let me go into assumptions first, just as a practice. So consider the assumption in the following statement: that the poorest will benefit from free college education programs. And I want you to keep in mind the 3 things on the right. Think of those 3 things. Think of the statement that's there, and tell me what are the assumptions here? What might make the statement fail? And I'll pause here and give you some time to think and respond. Yusra, feel free to moderate as you like to, but we'll have someone speak up here.
So I think the poorest will only benefit from free college education is a statement where it says, okay, you're, pointing out a certain class, and it's not important if even, the people who have, who belong to a better social class, they can also benefit from the program, no?
Of course, I mean, yeah, the poorest will benefit, but also the others as well. Um, but what are the assumption when you're thinking of whether the poor will benefit or not?
Anyone? Rizwan
Yeah.
Hanif.
I think the assumption underlying here is that poor really need this education. Means if we make the education free, then it will only benefit the poor only. And we assume that here that it is the first priority of the poor, that they really want that thing for them. Maybe we are not considering the fact that maybe they require the livelihood for themselves as a first priority and not the education.
Exactly. No, that's a good point. Yeah, go ahead, Mohsen.
I wanted to add that we're assuming that they will that providing them college education programs will be beneficial for them. That without any doubt that will be beneficial, but do they have any prior knowledge, not education, sorry, do they have their primary education completed? Because that is actually a requirement to study in a college. So if they do not have a primary level education and we are providing them college level education, how is that going to benefit them? So we really need to consider that as well.
Right. Oh, perfect. And Arsalan?
Sir, as people have already mentioned about their systematic barriers assumption, I believe the main assumption here in this statement is the accessibility assumption. I think the statement completely assumes that free college education program will, I mean, for them, only the poorest individuals are likely to have only these college programs. Otherwise, they will be unable to afford to it. So secondly, they also have like awareness and knowledge assumption as well in the statement as well. So there are a lot of statements, but I believe the primary assumption here is the accessibility assumption for in the statement.
No, all good answers. When we think of the poorest, when we think of any program that provides a service to the poor, we think it's going to benefit them, but that's not always necessarily the case. And like you said, the few things to think of is that do the poor really want these programs? Because for them, if their livelihood is more important, they don't want to spend 4 years studying full time when they could have been doing something to provide for themselves and their families. Whether they have the poorest are not necessarily going to have the education that you need to get into a college. And then obviously their accessibility, do they even know about the programs? So all of those assumptions are there. Especially when you make a policy for a country level, or when you want to spend something, a program like this would require billions and billions of rupees. You'll have to consider, okay, is my assumption really correct or not? So really good answers. Thank you, everyone. Let's have a similar. Let's do an exercise now. Instead of just everyone doing it together, do you want to do breakout rooms? Is that possible, or we can do the same thing what we did with the other one as well?
Shujat, I think we'll do the same.
Okay.
If anybody wants to join, they can raise their hand.
Okay, perfect. Let's do it. Let's repeat that with this one then.
All right, guys. Who's going to be first? Yes, I think Abdul Mukeed, but will say something. He's been a very regular participant of our mentorship series. You can take your time, Abdul Mukeed.
Oh, by the way, I apologize. Some of these examples are too much about economics and policy, and because that's my area of expertise. So the first things that come to my mind when making these examples are those areas. But yeah, go ahead. Anyone who wants to speak up.
I just want to add that the country or whoever decided to raise the taxes thinks that everyone will pay their taxes, their fair share of those taxes. So did they think through about tax fraud and those who evade taxes? Will that effectively increase their tax revenue?
Yeah, very good point.
And also, uh, yeah, that's it. Yeah, that's it.
Very good. Anyone else?
Yes, Aslanta hai.
Sir, I have taken the economics course back in my second semester in MBA. So I can understand there was some statement that the more the tax rate, the more the revenue there is going to be. The higher the tax rate, so the government believes that there's a stage that it was a Laffer curve kind of a thing, that displaces that where increasing the tax rates leads to higher tax revenue. But what happens is that there, when there is a more tax rate, that could decrease the revenue as well, and can incentivize the economic activity. So I think that is the assumption here as well, that higher the tax rate, the higher the revenue it's going to be. But it's the opposite. What happens in reality?
Exactly. So I think the two major assumptions that both of you have caught are number one is that people will continue to pay their fair share, and it will not increase fraud. And we know that in practice that's not true. And then the second assumption is that the economic activity in the country will remain at the same level. So if the same economic activity, higher rate will obviously increase the tax revenue. But we know from practice as well that very high taxes actually make people want to reduce the economic activity. Um, and so if the overall GDP comes down, the tax revenue also decreases, right? So let's go to the next one on modifying perspective. Again, this one I tried something that was less about economics and policy. So there's a city that wanted to improve its green spaces by planting more trees, refurbishing its existing parks. So existing parks, whatever there were, they added to the beauty. They added more trees, grass, everything, and they repaired the shaded sidewalks as well. This naturally, I mean, it's resulted in higher livability and quality of life for the residents. However, within 18 months, homelessness started to increase in the city, right? Why do you think that happened? Again, keep in mind the things on the right as you try to answer this.
Uh, I think since they improved their sort of surrounding, their environment, so that sort of just allowed the people who rent out their properties or stuff like that, they thought that since their sort of environment or the place where they live is like very attractive, so we should raise our rent rates. So uski wajah se people could no longer afford them and they started moving out, and maybe that's how it led to homelessness.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, so because the area was more attractive, it naturally meant that people wanted to move there, and that pushed up the rent prices. Any other comments? Anything else? All right. So just to yeah, go ahead. So whoever was that you?
I was just saying that we should move
Yeah,
ahead.
just to sum it up. So basically, your perspective is not just the people who were benefiting from more trees. It was also the people who could not potentially afford to live around the trees, right? So not everyone wants or is able to afford to have the high quality of life and livability that was suddenly being offered in the area. The next one again. So let's this is so there's on the right, the map that you see are different countries, right? And country A, which is the one in red, has a port, right? Suddenly, the port city has a sudden lethal new disease, and the government has responded by shutting down all commercial activity, including the port in the city. Now, you are consider yourself as a strategy head of a multinational food aid agency, and you have to determine how you respond to this situation. So I want you to just tell me what are the main things that we'll consider in your response.
Anyone?
Can I add?
Yes, sure, Mursal.
Since this, I think I'm assuming that this is the only port in the country. So any sort of imports or exports that can go through this port will be sort of like stopped. They will come to a halt because the government decided to shut it off. So now, since there are no outgoing and no incoming products, so that can lead to a decline in your economic activity. And also, as a strategy head of a food aid agency, I would say that this is not the right decision, because any sort of important food commodities, like basic ones like wheat, rice, if they cannot like enter in the country, then that will be sort of like a disaster, because it is used in our daily like food cooking of food consumption. So it's like a very key product commodity.
Okay, good point. What else would you consider here?
I would then probably appeal the government to not do this, but rather sort of deploy some sort of you can say uh, what is it called? क्या कहते हैं? Like आप एक introduce करवा देंगे कि you can have set up a sort of a procedure in which everything is sort of like sanitized, and those SOPs, you apply them and try to make the process as sort of available as possible, because you want to keep this port open and running. It cannot be shut down completely, because it will sort of like cripple your food chain. So yeah.
Yeah. No, very good. I mean, I mean, we can have all of those options, but at the end of the day, if people are actually dying on ground day in and day out, it's very likely that the port is not going to be able to operate, even if you keep it open. Maybe it operates at 10% of its capacity, if not at none
Yeah.
at all. So there is going to be a logistics challenge here. So how does the aid agency, as you as a strategy head, think of the impact and response?
As the head, I would then sort of prioritize the food products that are necessary to keep the food supply up and running. So I would sort of make a list of what are the food commodities or the products that are like important, and on top of those, the first few ones would be, as I mentioned earlier, wheat, rice, and some sort of other things like meat, if it's not available in the country, and other products that are like now very basic, that are required for cooking food. So we would mainly and mostly prioritize those, and set up like a system which allows the port to operate.
Okay. Arslan, did you have your hand up as well?
Sir, for the last point that you said, as a head, what are you going to do? Can I continue with that?
Yes.
Yeah, so I have assessed the situation. I have seen that now this is going to affect my population, and it's going to increase the health risk as well in the country as well. So as I had my response would be to introduce some kind of a smart lockdowns. So we know that we are very much aware that how the country has coped up with the COVID-19. So introducing smart lockdowns and collaborating with the humanitarian organization, bringing them on board, because when there is a disaster management, so you have these people on board available to provide you some sort of a funding when you are completely hijacked from this disease. And if it's epidemic, I think it's not pandemic. So if it's only there's a breakout within the country, so definitely I can form a task force and define their roles and responsibilities, and to
No,
ensure that the
yeah, yeah, so good.
logistic and supply chain can be catered. Sorry, sir.
I just want to make sure that you know that you're only the strategy head of a food agency, right? You don't have the
Yeah.
all the authority to go into smart lockdowns. What you can
Yes.
do is do things around food, and that's it. But let me actually, just to remind you, let me bring in the things that you have to keep in mind on the slide. Uh,
Yes.
so let me make sure it's easy. So yeah, keep these things in mind as you decide what your perspective is going to be.
Ahmad Abdullah says, shouldn't we consider the fact that food moving through the port may promote the spread of the lethal disease?
Sure, that's another thing that you can consider. Sure. Anything else?
Sir, I would definitely identify the food insecurity levels, that we know which people are going to be the most affected part of the region. That could be like children, elderly, and those people who are having pre-existing conditions as well. So I must need to know that how am I going to do the sourcing and procurement, because there are steps when you are critically thinking and analyzing the situation that you have on hand, because now you cannot rely on the basic data and facts, which is an analytical, I believe, thinking. So when you are critically evaluating a situation, you need to identify which place or which area of the country will be most affected and impacted, and how we can save the people, considering that there's going to be food shortage in the future. And that definitely that alternative distribution channels would be created, like we know about the airlift. If we have airlift on board, now it's not anymore in Pakistan, but the airlift and these kind of things that can, we have a potential space that new business can launch, and they can also provide some food services and stocking and warehousing the food as well. So multiple things can be taken. I think that's an endless debate, but some of things that I have pointed out can be done if you think so.
Right. So you're close. You want to look at the people who will be impacted, right, in the region. So look at like who are the people who can be impacted in the region by this.
Uh, I think the poorest of the country and the people who are homeless, they will be impacted first because they do not have enough financial resources to afford food on a daily basis. And second, to accommodate sort of everyone, since we don't want people dying, and as a food aid agency, our task is to provide food to everyone or the maximum number of people possible. So I would sort of have a go through of the food, the quantity of the food ingredients or the basic food items that we have in our inventory, and I would try to see or devise new sort of recipes in which we can sort of uh, कम से कम आप क्वांटिटी ऑफ द इंग्रेडिएंट्स यूज करके ऐसी डिशेस बना लें जिससे लोगों का पेट भी भर जाए तो that is one step that we can take and try to cut down on food wastages. ठीक है, and then also we can also ask other sort of we can also advertise for donations more so that people are encouraged to provide for the people who cannot afford food. And another point was, I think someone mentioned earlier that we need to procure food from other sources. We can, if the port is closed, we can look at f- uh, food coming into the country via the airplanes, वगैरह. So that can be also of help too.
Okay, very good. So before we move on, just one last question. So I can give you sort of a hint. Uh, what you've said about how we need to respond and what we respond with are all good things. We have to do all of those things, but focus more on where should your response be um, located.
So I
Shujat,
guess
I
it's
think
a
we,
port
yeah, sorry,
area
sorry.
or seaside base, because this is where the most of the port activity and fishing communities are there, fishermen and fish markets are there, which I'm guessing from the map, and workers and their families. So response team should be at a place where the port workers are residing and they're along with their families, and ship crews and shipping companies as well.
Can I add another point on top of his?
Yes.
Uh, it's not just the port city, but also the places where food was being transported from this city. So the government or whoever the country is, they didn't know how long the virus had been there, but by the time it had they had realized it, it might have spread to other places as well. So they are not aware where the sort of the food or the trucks or the people have have went to. So that can be a sort of a factor to keep in mind that जो इस शहर से बाहर कोई भी फूड ट्रांसपोर्टेशन वगैरह हुई है हमने उसको भी कंट्रोल करना है. So we would need to also focus on those cities as well.
Of course. So I think we were very, very close. And so what I was looking for was the fact that you have a port city, and it's likely it has traditionally been the source of food imports and transportation for entire region A of the country A, but also the landlocked countries that you can see behind A on the left, right? The blue country in the blue, country in the purple, possibly the one in green. We don't know what's on the other side. So those are also places that you have to consider, right? So if you are a multinational food aid agency, you start very quickly looking at, okay, who are the people who's going to potentially be at food security risk, and we immediately saw and jump in to solve that problem. So potentially, you're right, several people in country A, not just in the city, will be at risk, but so will the people outside of country A and the landlocked areas that were potentially depending on logistics through the port city. So that was where the impact you have to consider, like everyone and everything that is being impacted by one port, right? So just make sure that you're looking at the landlocked cities who potentially depend on country A. But let's move forward. So now let's look at consider the consequences, right? And remember, keep things in mind. You have to think ahead. The past will not determine the future, and the actions trigger a change in reaction. So company Y announced a 2 times increase in its net income in the first quarter compared to the last quarter, and its stock price as a result increased by 4 times, right? So quarter on quarter, they increased their income by 2 times, and the stock price as a result went up by 4 times. Next quarter, Y announced another 2 times increase in its net income quarter on quarter. How will the stock price this time? What will happen to the stock price?
Sujat, let's follow a 10-second rule. If nobody answers in 10 seconds, we will move forward. 5
Okay, then
seconds have already passed. Five, four.
Uh, I want to
Yes, yes.
say, that it jumped by another 4, but that would be too hasty to assume that there is like a constant multiplier that applies every time it's net income, the company's net income increases. So I'm not really sure that another increase of like 4x is like the right answer here. But I think I still need to think about some information that can be inquired from this case scenario. Can I have a few moments to think about this?
Sure, take your time. Anyone else in the meantime?
Anyone else who wants to contribute? All right. I think Mursal, you can type that in the chat box. Shujat, we should move forward.
Okay, very good.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can continue to think about that. Maybe we'll come back to this. But the exercise was also something very similar. And this is from the real life example. So in June 2014, Tesla Motors by Elon Musk, they decided to open source all of their patents related to electric vehicle technology and infrastructure, right? So everything was opened up, and any other company could use their patents for their own development without having to pay anything to Tesla. So that obviously is going to have an impact on Tesla as well, and wanted you to consider the short and long-term effects of that. We have very little time, so maybe 3 minutes, and then at 2:45 we open up to general questions. So anyone who wants to think about what might be the impact in the short term and then in the long term as well.
Can I ask a question first?
Yes.
Sure, sure.
What does open source mean? Like, it says that to open source its patent, did they like sort of just release their patent, like everyone can use it, or does
Yeah,
it mean
exactly.
something?
So they put out the technology in detail online, and then anyone could just download the details of the patents and use them, and will not have to pay royalty to Tesla.
So I guess the first impact on their revenue would be a decrease from the profit that they were making on that patent. I think
Right.
that would be the first drawback.
Exactly. Definitely for the short term, that would be the effect. What happens in the long run?
I th no,
It's okay. It's okay. Anyone else?
I guess in the
We
longer run, the proliferation of electric vehicles within society would increase because more companies would come up which are making electric vehicles, and that would overall benefit Tesla because the adoption of electric vehicles would increase.
Exactly, yeah. So which means that more cars on the road require more infrastructure of charging, and better, dealerships, better ecosystem around. So this would essentially grow the entire market, and Tesla would be one of the major beneficiaries of that growth in the market, because by itself, Tesla cannot develop the entire infrastructure. But if all several companies are working together, that was more possible for Tesla. And this is something, I mean, it's all retrospective at this point. This is actually what happened as well. So Tesla has been benefiting from this decision back in 2014, although at that time it seemed like not the best decision given that it reduced their revenues. Aslan, did you have anything to add?
Sir, I think here, I don't think, I mean, when he was interviewed about this strategic move, his intentions was to increase the brand impact, which is like the positive brand image throughout the world, which is becoming the complete, becoming the leader of the market. Because now open sourcing could, allow other people to, uh, follow the same pattern that how electric vehicles are being made and follow the trend of sustainability. As we know, UAE has now, they want complete net zero carbon emission by 2040. So it's like he has increased the trends, and now UAE also have the taxis from Tesla as well. So that's a long-term impact that now the countries are able to get those electric vehicles, and has started the strategic partnership with the environmental agencies as well to generate new set of revenue streams. It is increasing the job creation, and it is fostering the competition as well in the market, because now Toyota has also brought the hybrid system, and I would say even Ford is also doing with electric vehicles as well. But UAE is a melting point of all these things, because I have been to their Expo 2020, and I've seen that how these people are so much willing to adopt the sustainable environment and make sure there is net zero carbon emission by 2040. So Tesla, by open sourcing, has given the market influence in the long term, and long term cost benefits going to increase, and probably, as we have learned from the economy, which is there, it's going to tap the economies of scales as well. So ultimately, more job creation, the revenue will go up, increase in GDP, overall positive impact on the environment of the country as well. So, and it will ultimately help him solidify his career as a market leader.
No, exactly, definitely. And but when Elon Musk talks about this, that's where your critical thinking comes in, because you want to make sure that you understand what his incentives are and potentially what he's thinking of in the long term and strategically. So it's not I mean, I'm sure he's committed to sustainability, but that may not have been the only driving factor behind this decision. And that's where you think critically about their decisions and how it may impact them in the future. But I think that's it on the exercises. I'll just open the space for everyone if you have any questions in the next few minutes. You don't have to restrict it to critical thinking. Anything else as well, happy to answer.
Yes, so I'll take this moment to appreciate our participants, Arsalan Tahir, Mursal Farooq, Abdullah for actively participating. Thank you so much. Now, the rest of you, if you have any questions, you can ask Shujat. Yes, Arsalan Tahir raised his hand.
Sir, I have one question. Since we were discussing about the critical thinking, what would be the impact of analytical thinking over here? Does it is a prerequisite for the critical thinking, or comes like anywhere? Like, can you just give a little bit comparison with an example about analytical thinking and critical thinking?
Look, I think analytical thinking is one step before critical thinking, because uh, to do an analysis, you need to use some skills to that are relevant to the topic itself. So for example, some of my examples were related to policy or economics. So you need to have some level of analytical thinking to be able to look at that topic from that point of view. So for example, with taxes, anyone who's read basic economics would know that raising tax rates is not always helpful to increase revenues, right? So that's something you know from your analysis. But someone who does it critically can still get to the same answer without having that background in economics. So there's a slight difference. I think you can do critical thinking by yourself in most cases, but having the ability to analyze a situation based on your existing knowledge or skills that you've developed is also very helpful. But it doesn't take you all the way there, and doesn't take you all the way there when you are solving different problems that are not necessarily within your domain at all times. Does that make sense? I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. I have seen it that how I was looking only at the map of one point, but I have to consider the other part of the cities as well. So this is where critical thinking comes in.
Right.
Yes. Are there any more questions before we end this amazing session? No? All right. All right. I think you've pretty much explained everything, Shujat. Thank you so much for your time. This was a very insightful, very informative session. And thank you, all the students who joined. Thank you for your presence. Stay tuned for the upcoming mentorship series. Yeah, have a very, very good day.
Sure.
Good weekend.
Thank you. Have a good weekend,
Allah
everyone.
Hafiz. Allah
Thank
Hafiz.
you, sir. Allah Hafiz. Great session. Good day.
Allah Hafiz.